Hello everyone, and welcome to the third installment in my new series about Duelyst, produced in partnership with Counterplay Games. Today I want to talk about factions. Cards in Duelyst are broken down into 6 factions, each with its own unique mechanics and playstyle. While there are also neutral cards you can put into any deck, the first and most important decision that you make when building a deck is which faction you're going to play. So let's meet the factions. The first faction you're introduced to in this tutorial, which happens to be the faction I've personally played the most, is VANAR. VANAR's faction-specific mechanic is Zeal, which grants bonuses to units if they're next to your general on the board. It's also the faction with the heaviest emphasis on Provoke, which allows your minions to protect one another and your general from attack. These two mechanics, combined with the prevalence of healing effects in the faction, lend toward defensive, board dominance-focused strategies, which is precisely the style of gameplay that I most enjoy. The next faction you meet in the tutorial, and also my second most played faction, is Magmar. Magmar has 2 faction-specific mechanics, Rebirth and Grow. Rebirth causes minions to turn into eggs when they die, which hatch into new versions of those minions if the eggs aren't destroyed before the end of your next turn. Grow does exactly what you might expect, causing the minion to get bigger at the start of each of your turns. Magmar also has a higher incidence of Frenzy than the other factions, including ways to give the ability to your minions. These mechanics tend to mean Magmar decks focus on winning the game through playing big, hard-to-kill individual threats. In sharp contrast to Magmar's big minion style is ABYSSIAN. ABYSSIAN has many cards that generate multiple small minions, along with ways to take advantage of those extra bodies, usually by destroying them yourself to generate some kind of effect. ABYSSIAN's faction-specific mechanic is Deathwatch, which generates an effect anytime a minion dies, whether yours or your opponent's. ABYSSIAN also has the ability to inflict the board with Shadow Creep, an effect that causes certain spaces on the board to harm opposing units, with damage that increases with the number of Shadow Creep tiles in play. These mechanics can lead ABYSSIAN in a number of directions, from an aggressive swarm strategy that sacrifices Wraithlings for fun and profit, to late-game control that aims to win the game with big minions and Shadow Creep. Next up, we have VANAR. VANAR's faction-specific mechanic is Infiltrate, which gives minions bonus effects when they're near your opponent's starting side of the board. To support minions with Infiltrate, VANAR has a number of cards that create walls, immobile minions that can force your opponents to go where you want on the board. Additionally, VANAR has a tribal theme of Vespere minions, as well as cards that interact with them, which can lead to a number of interesting deck-building decisions. VANAR's card pool can lend itself to a variety of playstyles, from early game tempo to late game control. Similarly flexible are the VETRUVIAN. VETRUVIAN's faction-specific mechanic is Blast, which causes a minion to deal damage to every enemy in a straight line on the board when it attacks. Blast minions, and spells that buff them, can allow VETRUVIAN decks to play a very controlling style that can dominate the board. Like the VANAR, the VETRUVIAN have a faction-specific tribe, which is Dervish. A number of VETRUVIAN cards create or buff Wind Dervishes, small minions that disappear at the end of the turn. Setting up and protecting obelisks that generate dervishes can make VETRUVIAN games play out very differently than any other faction. Last, but certainly not least, is Songhai. Songhai's faction-specific mechanic is Backstab, which allows units to deal bonus damage and receive no damage back when they attack another unit from the space directly behind it. To support Backstab, Songhai has cards that allow you to teleport your units around the board. Songhai is also the most spell-focused of all of the factions, with cards that give you bonuses for playing spells, as well as a lot of inexpensive spells that can work together to do a lot of damage right away. These combine to make Songhai the most combo-oriented faction, which usually aims to win the game not through board presence, but bursts of spell and minion damage together. And those are the factions of Duelyst. Hopefully I've given you a good idea about what faction or factions you might want to choose to play. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.